I'm English Saul. Welcome to System Catalyst, the podcast that cracks the code for making the world a better place. You've heard us use the term ecosystem a few times on this show. It's a good way to describe the interplay between all the different stakeholders within a system. Of course, as you might recall from your childhood science class, the term ecosystem comes from nature. It describes all of the organisms, minerals, and weather conditions within a certain environment. So we thought, what can system catalysts who are trying to manage an ecosystem of stakeholders learn from those who work with natural ecosystems? And nobody knows more about this than farmers. Our guest today is Jack Algiere, the Chief Agroecology Officer at the Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture in upstate New York. I have had the privilege of going to Stone Barns, and it's amazing. They are using 400 acres of land to test new regenerative agricultural methods. They operate as an education center and also provide the produce for a Michelin-starred restaurant, Blue Hill. I wanted to have Jack on the show so that he could tell us what farming has taught him about ecosystems. And let me tell you, he did not disappoint. I promise by the end of our conversation, you'll want to run through a prairie and hug a tree. So I have a question for you. You probably get asked this all the time, but do you have a favorite crop or plant?
It's funny that you say you probably get asked this all the time. I was just with a couple from India just this morning, and they said, "What's your favorite tree?" And it's a hard thing. It is a hard thing because it's literally like every day there's something different. But my response to them was, when it comes to like a system, I think about the oldest, most mature things. There's this huge old red oak in one of our pastures that's probably 275 or 300 years old. And it makes me feel so good to be near it and to have that kind of stability in the landscape. So I think, it's like emotions. I like them all. They're all valuable in some ways. But, this time of year, my favorite thing to be eating out of the garden is peas.
Ooh.
Like the first of our peas.
Yeah.
Fresh peas are pretty awesome. And they're like good for breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that too.
That's awesome. I love peas. Jack, from what I understand, you've been actually farming for over 2 decades. And I'm curious to know, did you come from a family of farmers? Where did this passion and excitement for farming come from for you?
Yeah, I grew up on a small farm in Rhode Island. We had a homestead farm, my family there, and both of my parents worked off of the farm in different businesses, and my mom worked at the university, and my dad has a business, a restaurant equipment business. And we lost our family farm. We sold the farm when I was a teenager. And that first loss, which was kind of a real eye-opener for me, just how fragile ownership is in general and our relationship to land. And, I grew up thinking, as you probably with your kids feel, like the land is part of them. It's part of us. We grow up on a piece of land and we learn not just about that it's a productive thing, actually more so the other way, that it's actually part of us and all of the diversity that a place is. And it just sings. It teaches us about ourselves. I went to school for plant science at the University of Rhode Island, and all through college farmed biodynamically, did lots of different organic landscaping work and gardens and that sort of thing. And I worked for an incredible greenhouse manager, Bud Smith, for many years in high school and the early part of college. And he was a very conventionally minded Korean War vet greenhouse manager, very strict, and taught me so much about how to be efficient in my work. But he had also sort of seen organic as something that was in the past and that our future was in chemistry, basically. And he's a product of the 50s, so I felt like in some ways I was thinking, all right, there's another way. So that was one of the big movements, because I saw that all these old timers kind of believed in the organic movement of growing things, but the consumer was demanding that they produce something very differently. And they had just literally given up on the fact. And I kept saying, well, if you're saying the customer is always right, but the result of the customer is actually something very bad that they need to know about, shouldn't we let them know? And he's like, no, I mean, that could put us out of business. Like just thinking that the risk and the threat of that was too great. And I thought there's got to be a way to do this at the mainstream, not just hidden somewhere. So anyway, Shannon, my wife, and I moved. We farmed together through college, and then we moved to Colorado and later to California. And one of my mentors, amigo Bob is his name, Bob Contisano, came back to me and said, there's this place in Westchester, Rockefeller property, that they want to turn into this organic farm and restaurant. He's like, really, you're the one. You have to go do this. You really have to go. And I thought, whoa. Well, it seems like a little bit of a stretch, and it seems too close to the city for me. But at the same time, I thought, the places where I had been farming, where I thought that it was really working well, which was generally in rural environments and communities that were already bought into these ideas, I wasn't satisfied in those environments. They felt too isolating for me. Like there wasn't enough service associated to it. And so the offer for Stone Barns was both a great challenge operationally to be able to put some of these ideas into practice more at a larger scale, but also just to challenge this idea that a lot of the people that I would be interfacing with didn't believe or know about what I was talking about. It's part of my role at Stone Barns is to be able to orchestrate a bigger picture for people who come into it that actually are very well educated, but have not had this kind of experience and engagement. And I believe that it's really compelling.
Yeah. What does your average day look like, Jack? What day to day, what is it that you sort of wake up and what is it that you go do? Because I am envisioning this mix of actual farming, but then also doing this really intense cognitive work of going from that macro that you've been describing to kind of the micro and continuously up and down. So I don't know, just tell me a little bit about what your day to day is.
Yeah, well, this morning I was out on the farm. I was in a few different places, sort of tinkering around. I have to go back and look at a compost pile and look at some material that I promised I would look at for somebody. And then I'm going to move some chickens. And then I have to get on another call. And that's kind of the day. It's sort of in and out. I follow the moon and all the astrological calendar for all the work that we do. So my timing is really all the touching of the planet, all the work on the soil is all relative to those calendars. So I block out times for cultivation. I block out times for certain harvests if I need to be in a piece of equipment or teaching somebody. And then I block out times for things like this, and I block out times for writing. But otherwise, like I said, because it came out of me farming all the time, there's not a 9 to 5 necessarily in my head. So yeah, it's a busy kind of day most of the time and lots of different diverse things.
Yeah.
But I consider it all one thing.
I love that. When we were all back together at Stone Barns, I guess it probably was almost a year ago now, but you said something to me on that visit that I feel really sums up a lot of what you just said. And you said productivity is the result of good stewardship and relationship. Productivity shouldn't necessarily be the center or the aim.
Yeah. It's one of the tenets of the way I think is that productivity is a result. It's not a goal. And that's one of the very important messages that I have learned and I stick with. I really stick with it. But the point is, I guess the other side of that, it's not just about chemicals, you don't need them. You need an alternative. So what are the goals? Well, the goals are pleasure. Our senses themselves are a goal. If we can excite those senses, the beauty, the taste, that stuff matters because that is what sustainability starts to look like. The next one's health. That's really a goal. Health is a goal. And stability is a goal. So those things together, this kind of sense of pleasure and fulfillment and flourishing and health and stability of that place. And that can be applied to the way I think about how I want my day to go. but it also has a lot to do with the way we design the farm. It does not negate the fact that there are deadlines and that there are start dates and all those things, like the calendar and the design of things. I actually think that way of thinking actually makes it more precise, because it actually broadens the way we look at the day and the system itself. If you were to just look in and ask me for all the little details about all the different crops we grow and all the different things that we're working on, anyone listening would think that is just so extraordinary, hyper active. There's just so too much stuff going on. But I guess that's the same way that you would look at, a forest. And even my wife, Shannon, she's always said to me, she's like, I'm not quite sure why you always think it's going to be easier when you add something new. And it's like this idea that like, we need to bring this other piece in to the system. And I know that's going to like fulfill that cycle. It's going to really close it out, because I'm struggling with getting this piece set. So that's the thing. It's like not diversity just for the sake of having more stuff. It's diversity for the sake of having synchronicity, right? And that's what we're really looking for. So if there's a stakeholder that's not there, then the thing doesn't function properly.
Does this all sound familiar yet? When dealing with a complex system, your instinct might be to compartmentalize everything, the way that 20th century industrial farmers did. Instead, try to embrace that complexity and recognize it is a healthy natural ecosystem. Jack doesn't just use this method with his crops. He also uses it with the people around him. When dealing with different stakeholders, he tries to recognize and embrace their differences, while also finding a common goal to rally around. And much like natural ecosystems, communities need time and patience to take root.
We've been sort of less than satisfied in some ways about the impact that our actions have made over the years. And we've changed several times and iterated on how to do the best. Like, what's the best way to engage with this community? Because, of course, everybody should have access to that. But there are a couple of limitations. One of the limitations, of course, is the physical property itself, is that we can't handle that many people at once and maintain that kind of health and stability of an environment. So if we were just fully publicly open, then we would get half of New York City there, and it would trample everything that we tried to create. So there's that side of things, is that what that means is that we need to be really cognitive about who is actually going to be on it. We have to be very intentional about who and how people interface with the place. Now, that does mean that we can do outreach, but then, of course, we're a place-based organization. So if we do too much outreach, we start to leave our planet. And that is difficult too. So the more we've done this, and I want to be honest with this question, because I think in some ways, I've loved that we've done farm camps and apprenticeships and community garden work and work in schools. There was an era where we just had tens of thousands of school children every week, every year, just like on the farm with us, and the farmers are teaching them awesome stuff, but still just a one-day field trip. And, I don't know about you, but I don't remember any of my field trips except for the fact that I wasn't in school. And so I want to create environments for people and for this stuff. So in some ways, the best audience for us has been our insulated internal audience, the people that have worked here and worked in this place. And that, after so many years of doing that and practicing together between the kitchen and researchers and farmers and ecologists, and we're working with all these academic researchers that are on very long timelines, very theoretical, waiting on grant funding to do different things and all that. And they have so much interest, but it's also really slow. The academic gear goes real slow. The agricultural gear is also slow because it takes time for systems to develop, like these long-term crop rotations and polycultural rotations that we're running. We can't promise anything in the first year. It could take a decade before you really see the big, huge biodiversity change. Or it may be that it's more immediate, but we can't prove it until we see a few more years. So there's those things. And then you have the community who is, widely dispersed, but also has a very clear sense of where they're not being met. And then there's the chefs who are lightning speed and change their stuff every night and tell stories, and they have this incredible mouthpiece, and like they're literally like an amplifier. So when you take all four of those groups, just those four groups, and you stick them all in the same room, you kind of have to give people exercises to do. How do you find those intersections where where everybody's timeline and contribution is a necessary component, a sort of equal stakeholder? So a lot of the work that we do is just around that, is to match people up and give them little projects. And we do lots of these kinds of simple single species or some cooking demonstration where they bring in a researcher and they're farming like this and they're trying it out in the community garden in the Bronx. And it's just a little project. It could last a few months. It could go for a long time. And we just do dozens and dozens of those. And if we want to work and have a long-term relationship and everybody's super high-minded about how we can create, climate modeling and all this stuff, then we keep that conversation going, and we start with projects so people know how to work with each other across these different stakeholder pieces and just test at a level that is realistic from a funding and time perspective, and also fun.
I love the way that you have centered this idea of agroecology. I'm saying that right? Agroecology.
Yeah.
And that's your title, right? You're director of agroecology at Stone Barns. Does that also sort of help you define what you strive for with respect to impact? Like how does that term and that definition kind of dovetail into what success looks like or what impact looks like for the farm?
I like agroecology because it does, as a term, it means three things. It means a scientific discipline, it means an agricultural practice, and it means a social movement. And for a long time, I was leveraging other terms like ecological farming or organic, which all are great terms and they have meaning, but they don't get to the greater movement and inclusivity of it all. Those are just adjectives, essentially. There's a feeling that I've gotten is that what is a successful food system? It's like a successful food culture is one where everyone feels like a contributor, right? And we live in a world where most of us feel like recipients, and that's about it. We have a hard time understanding how my job in an office or my job at this retail store or whatever has any value or impact on the way we eat and farm. And I actually think that we kind of need to make it more personal. We need to recognize that that these very small things like eating together and paying attention to our local environment around us, around the community, and getting engaged in our civic duty in some ways is actually a really, I don't know, there's something to it. It's like, what's inherently human, and how do we regain that in this very different kind of society that we've created? And yeah, I think it revolves around food. And food is the gateway to nature for those people who don't step outside a lot. The reality is like, it's their biggest impact on the natural world. It's how they eat every day. And I think also for that matter, when we feel that way, we become more emotionally stable as a society because there's a greater aesthetic, there's more understood. I see it, I've seen it in communities that have not had access to that sort of thing, and the way they consider themselves as like, not participating or something, but it's wrong. So I guess my point again is that a healthy food system is one where everybody actually feels like contributors. And that means that we have a kind of responsibility to create new ways of experience. And that could be in urban environments. It should be definitely in suburban rural environments where people can feel comfortable returning to farms and going into areas, natural areas that have been managed, and to try to reintegrate this stuff into the way we care for our community.
So, for some of our listeners, let's just say that there's a handful of people out there who don't find kind of this work and this stuff and this idea about agriculture and food systems. Let's say they don't find it accessible. What would your advice be to them? What should they do? How should they start?
Yeah, well, every community has some opportunities. It could just be at the local library. It could be at the local farmers market. Again, the answer to that is relationships, right? Because we live in a nuclear kind of autonomous society here, and we forget that we can rely on each other and that there are lots of people who would love to share. People are kind. And when you show curiosity, there's entry. And that could be just showing up at a seminar at the library or walking around the farmer's market on a Saturday morning. It takes an action. And I guess that's the thing. One of the things I've definitely learned through farming is that there's no real theory in this. It's action. It's contact. I see things happening in some of the most underserved communities in New York City, relationship-wise, in these community gardens, and the way they're using this space so much more efficiently and so much more generatively than I see in places where people have a lot more access. It's not just an underserved. I mean, there's a lot of very wealthy people in this world who just can't find the connection. And that, some people, I think, in some ways may have some shame in that way or whatever. And on the underprivileged side, feel like there's too much stress for them to change what they're doing. Like the risk is just too high. And that's where community action matters. That's, if we know it's a systems problem, then we need to create new roles and new ways to help the rest of the people in our community if we have the ability to do so. You have to be brave. I mean, I guess that's the part of this thing. You just have to take a step and go out and change your regular habit a little bit and see what emerges. What are the resources in your local community about where, how many farmers markets are in your town? Is there a food bank? Is there a soup kitchen? Is there a community garden or two? Is there an environmental committee? If you have any time at all, they're generally free, and then that door opens to different opportunities.
You heard Jack. Start with what's around you. Even in the most artificial of places, you can form a relationship with nature. The same goes for system change. You don't need wealthy funders to become a system catalyst. As long as you recognize the relevant stakeholders and the connection between them, you can make a difference.
There's so much dignity in regenerative agriculture from a human perspective and with the planet and with each other. And I think that there's a certain amount of hope that it comes with too, because we live in a world where that's not as common, and we throw a lot of language out there around what sustainability is and regenerative and all these different terms that we use, but it's a real thing. It's actually a real connected thing that I like to think isn't just rhetoric, but a way of engaging with each other. I grew up around all organic systems, but then I worked in a lot of conventional agriculture, and I went to school at a conventional land-grant university. And really just because I wanted to learn what that system was really like and why there seemed to be so much promise in it. And to be honest, it's riddled with problems, and it continues to be more and more troublesome for us socially and ecologically. And so I've always just felt like, in some ways, hope beyond hope, that we can leave the 20th century and all the great innovation that we created in separation and compartmentalization that we created in the 20th century and move forward and start to integrate those things back together. That's very much how I feel about agriculture, and I believe it's systematic and metaphoric and regenerative for all of us. Nature wants to repair itself and to keep moving. And we do lots of stuff to create obstacles so that can't happen. So a lot of the work we do is just to get out of the way, just allow the space to generate.
That is just a wonderful way to encapsulate this idea of system change and what it is to be a system catalyst. And so, Jack, we can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast and sharing your wisdom.
Well, thank you, English. And, your work is really inspiring, and just bringing in this agricultural perspective and this kind of way of thinking into that means so much to me. So thank you for that.
That's it for today's show. Please don't forget to subscribe to System Catalysts so you don't miss out on a new episode. Also, do us a huge favor by rating our podcast and leaving us a review. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all in the next episode. Before we go, we'd like to thank our producers at Human Group Media. We'd also like to thank our incredible network of partners who are supporting our mission: the Skoll Foundation, the Aspen Institute's Global Leadership Network, Echoing Green, DRK Foundation, Maverick Collective, Virgin Unite, Charlize Theron Africa Outreach Project, Boldly Go Philanthropy, Synergos, Forward Global, Nexus, and New Profit. If you are interested in becoming a system catalyst and would like to learn more about our partners, please visit systemcatalysts.com.